Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Bryn Durgan, and I'm the Director of Programming here at Bookstore One. And I know there are some familiar faces in the crowd tonight, but if this is your first time with us, thank you so much for being here. Of course, we're a bookstore, so we sell books, but we also do a lot of events like this. So we have author talks, book signings, workshops, live radio theater events, you name it. So if you're not already on our mailing list, then you can sign up right downstairs. But yeah, thanks again for being here. It means the world to us. So now, let me introduce you to the author of the hour. He has been the radio play-by-play broadcaster for the Tampa Bay Lightning since 2002. Before that, he spent 11 years as a broadcaster in hockey's minor leagues. 8 of those were in Hershey, Pennsylvania, where much of this novel takes place. He is a 1991 graduate of Yale University, and he is the author of the book that you have got to get today, if you have not yet. And it's his first novel. It is called Blind Squirrel. And of course, I'm talking about Dave Mishkin. So join me in giving him a warm welcome. Thanks for being here, Dave.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Oh, is your mic on?
I'm a broadcaster. I should know to turn the lights on.
Which brings me to my first question, which is, they say that you should write what you know, but I think with this book, you don't have to know so much about hockey to enjoy it, right? But I'm wondering what that process was like.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think I'm a little tangled myself.
Most readers don't have the encyclopedic knowledge of hockey that you have.
Right, so the idea for this book came to me in the late 2000s. That was quite a while ago. So I had the idea to write a story involving hockey, which I knew. I felt I could write the hockey. And I had the idea for the arc of a story that I thought would be compelling. And the arc of the story at that time is the arc of the story that it came to be. So in the late 2000s, my idea was this. A minor league hockey player who is silently struggling with his mental health, is having a successful career, but he is silently struggling with his mental health and not sharing that with anyone. And it stems from a childhood trauma where his parents die in a car accident when he's 12. Then he himself sustains an injury and is forced to retire, but it's at that point that he's able to begin the healing process. And the guy at the end of the book is in a much better place than the guy at the beginning of the book. That was the idea I had in the late 2000s. I had never tried to write anything like this before. My experience writing had kind of been hockey related for game programs, or later as I stayed in hockey as the internet took hold, websites, I read opinion pieces. I'd never written anything make-believe, but I felt that I could, unlike a novelist who is maybe doing research on hockey, I felt, okay, well, I know hockey, so I can write that part, and let me figure out the rest as I go along. So I said, okay, let me start at the beginning. So I began at what I thought was the beginning, and I didn't get very far, didn't like what I wrote, and I got stuck, and I got frustrated, and I put it away. And I left it alone. I didn't delete what I had written, but I thought maybe I'll come back to this someday, maybe I won't. And as the years passed, it looked like I wouldn't. So it was about 15 years later. It's the spring of 2022. The Lightning had won Stanley Cups in 2020 and 2021, and they were going for their 3rd in a row, but they were in deep trouble in the first round, playing Toronto down 3-2, and the first team to win 4 would advance. So it was looking like, unless the Lightning could win the last 2 games in that series, that I was going to have a longer than normal off season, which through COVID, and we had a weird scheduling for the previous couple of years, I just hadn't had a lot of downtime. So I said offhandedly to my wife, like, boy, if the Lightning don't get out of the series, I wonder what I'm going to do with myself this off season. And she said just as offhandedly, well, why don't you go back to that novel that you started all those years ago? And I was like, yeah, right. But I didn't dismiss the idea out of hand. And what I did was, I didn't go back to the computer. I started just thinking about the story. And I left this beginning part where I'd gotten stuck alone. And where I began the second time around was kind of the second half of the book, this recovery. Because I really didn't have an idea of what the recovery would look like. So I said, all right, well, what is this recovery going to look like? And I knew he was going to meet someone. So I started there. All right, who is she? how do they meet? Why do they connect? And it was like the first two puzzle pieces fell into place. So as it turned out, the Lightning ended up winning the final two games of that series. They advanced to the second round, they advanced to the third round, they got to the Stanley Cup final again. And during that time of 5 to 6 weeks, I didn't write a word, but I just thought about the story. And the whole thing came together in my mind. I've never really experienced anything like that before or since in terms of the creative process. But what I discovered was, after the fact, that I was not the sort of person that can just like sit down and figure out the story as I'm writing it. I kind of needed a roadmap. So the Lightning got to the final. We were playing Colorado. The series started in Denver. I remember the plane landed in Denver for game 1. I went to my hotel room and I wrote a chapter outline. So I was like, I have 14 chapters, 7 in part 1, 7 in part 2, and I know exactly what is going to happen in each of these chapters. And it was over the course of that series, which Colorado did win. The Lightning did win their third in a row. But the happy news was that I actually wrote the first chapter in the new version, and the chapter that I wrote was the very last chapter in the book. So the first chapter I wrote the second time around was chapter 14. So I had a bow to put on the end of it, and now that would get the most heavily edited. After I did the other 13, I'm like, okay, I need to change some things here. But again, that just illustrates the fact that for me, like my process, I absolutely needed a roadmap to know what was gonna happen. And there were certain advantages to that for me. First of all, I could jump around. So I wrote chapter 14 first, and then I wrote chapter 10, which is the most dialogue heavy chapter in the novel. I'm like, I'm gonna totally forget the cars of the train here and the dialogue. So I need to get this one down. And then the third chapter I wrote was actually chapter 3, which was kind of sort of where I got stuck the first time around. And then once I did those 3 chapters, I kind of went back and went through it chronologically. I actually looked back at the garbage that I wrote the first time around, which was kind of sort of chapters 1 and 2. And I'm like, I'm keeping very little of this, but I kept some of it. And it spilled out of me. I mean, I wrote the whole thing in about 3.5 months.
Which your process is interesting. Which I obviously did not know this beforehand. But as a live broadcaster, it's a lot of reacting in the moment. Like you can't plan out what you're going to be saying. And obviously you're so skilled at that, at like improv almost, right? So I imagined that it would be a big shift writing a book because there's so much revision and reflection. What was that shift like? It sounds like it came kind of naturally to you.
Yeah, so I guess I'll take a little exception with that. Like I am not doing improv when I'm broadcasting because the script is in front of me.
Yeah, true.
But it's not insignificant because I am relaying what I am seeing, but I'm being given the information to relay. So my brain, I think all of our brains work faster than our fingers. So sidebar, and sorry, I tend to jump around a lot here, but I had a conversation with a local author in the Tampa Bay area who also used St. Pete Press, which was my publisher. And we had a mutual friend. He's like, you guys, why don't we all go to lunch? So I met this guy, and what he said to me was, and he has a newspaper background, so he's used to writing on deadline, just cranking it out, has to finish in a certain amount of time. He said, no matter what, I write an hour every morning. I sit down and I write an hour every morning. I'm like, that sounds like the worst nightmare for me because I wouldn't even know what to say, right? I always need to think about what I'm gonna say first. And then he heard my process and he's like, that sounds like a nightmare to me because I'm figuring out the story as I'm writing it. But for me, I was able to do those revisions up here. So I would like think of a scene and all right, what is happening in the scene? Particularly if it's dialogue. How are the two people communicating? Let me think about the scene again and again and again, and the scene would build and I'd get more dialogue. And because I repeated it so much in my head, it would almost became like a photograph, right? So when I sat down to write it, I remembered, I really didn't take a lot of notes during that kind of brainstorm period of whatever it was, 5-6 weeks, but I just remembered it. Because I spent so much time thinking about it. And the other part that came from this was I got to know the characters really, really well because I spent a lot of time with them. So my protagonist is Noah Nicholson. He's the hockey player and the protagonist of the story, but he's not the only main character. There are other significant characters in the book, and because I spent so much time thinking about them, I got to know them really well. And that was like the gift that kept on giving, because as I would think of a scene, because I knew the character so well, I would know exactly how they would react to that scene. And even because I knew the character so well, I might think of a scene based on knowing the characters really well, if that makes sense. So that's why the actual like writing of the novel, I wouldn't say it was easy. It was certainly not easy, but it was a lot smoother for me because I kind of had my script.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we all know that the writing, the publishing industry, it's full of so many challenges. I'm wondering what is an unexpected challenge that you faced?
I wouldn't even say resistance, just complete dismissal of the notion of a novel like this by the publishing industry. And by publishing industry, I'm really talking about agents.
Right, and describe what you mean by a novel like this.
So if you were a literary, so I got an education in the publishing world. I had my manuscript. I'm like, I'm really happy with what I wrote, and what do I do now? And I had some friends like, look, I went to Yale, so I know some people who are like, they've written books, they have agents, they've publishers. So one guy I went to school with, he was 2 years behind me, but we traveled in the same circles. He's like, here are 3 literary agents, start with them. So I'm like, okay. So all 3 got back to me right away because I used my friend's name and they knew him. And they were like, I do nonfiction. I do nonfiction. I do nonfiction. I'm like, okay, well, that's all you do? And I'm like, okay, so I guess agents have their specialties. So the headwind that I faced, agents, they are interested in art, but they're also interested in making money. So the agents have to sell the idea. If they take you on, they have to sell the idea to one of the 5 big publishing houses who are also interested in, will this book make money? So the headwind I faced was, I wrote a novel, which is fiction. The main audience for this sort of book, women. When you look at the cover, you see sports. Actually, I didn't have a cover at that point. I just had the idea, but they're like, this is a hockey book. Women are not going to be interested in reading a hockey book, and men are not going to be interested in reading fiction. And it was almost like, I don't even know how these agents handle, so I didn't realize there were so many submissions, but apparently they get like 200 submissions a week. So they're making a split-second decision, and I couldn't get somebody to spend the time to actually, even like you were like, I looked at the book here in the last 10 minutes and I kind of like what I see. Like, I couldn't even get that. Like, they're just, they're basically like, this isn't gonna work for me. So I didn't spend a lot of time doing this. I spent enough time to know, like, why am I breaking my back trying to go this conventional route? I have a platform. Like, I have an NHL team with its marketing engine behind me. I mean, I'm not like going out to the Gulf of Mexico with a stick and a string and trying to catch a fish. I mean, like, I can self-publish, and I didn't exactly self-publish. I used St. Pete Press, and they provided me with a lot of support, but it was kind of self-published. But I was able to get a lot of juice from my position to get the book out there, which is, other than the money that you get up front, that's really, I think, the main benefit from going with a Random House or Simon & Schuster. Like, you're getting the support there. I'm like, well, I'm not going to get that, but there might be a 25-year-old Starbucks barista who wrote a great novel, and that barista is going to have a hard time getting oxygen. I have a path for oxygen, and I'm like, I believe if people actually hear about this book and get it and read it, they're going to like it.
Right.
And that was kind of, I didn't write the book to make a lot of money. I mean, most people don't. I wrote the book because it was a passion project, but I did write the book to be read. Yeah, and there's a difference.
Totally, and even if you had been published by Simon & Schuster, you see how many books we have, right? Like, there's so many books, and a lot of them don't get read. So I think sometimes going with a smaller press actually can get you a wider circulation in that way, because again, like, you've been doing events all over the area, and you know, seem to be having
Yeah,
a
the
lot of
marketing
success.
the marketing part of it is not my forte, and I actually just like linked up with somebody who knows social media way better than me,
Yeah.
and so I think that'll maybe help get the word out outside the market. But
Yeah.
that's been an education as well. But look, it's been very rewarding, the whole experience, from the writing it to the publishing process, and you know, I did a lot of the editing myself. They provided support, St. Pete Press, but it was like I kind of was the driver, and so
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I kind of oversaw a lot of the editing process, mostly syntax, and certainly it's been incredibly rewarding to have the book be read and have people get back to me and tell me how much they enjoyed it and how much they connected with it.
Yeah, what has the feedback been like? Was there anything that really surprised you too, someone's interpretation of the book?
So I tried to write an accessible novel, and what I mean by that is, if you like hockey and you like sports, there's a lot in here that you will find interesting because this was the strongest element that I could bring to the book from the beginning part, which was knowledge of the sport. So I can relay that in a way that maybe a lot of other novelists who haven't worked in pro hockey for 30 plus years would have difficulty doing. Maybe they could do research on it, but I had innate knowledge. That's in there. But I didn't want this to be a book exclusively for people who like sports or like hockey, because there's a lot more in this book. There's the mental health component, it's a love story. There's a love between Noah and Lydia in the second half of the book, but there's also, like, his parents are not two-dimensional figures. Like, his childhood is a big part of the first part with flashback chapters, and his parents are real people, and like, there's the love between a boy and his parents, and there's the love between the captain of a team, which he is, and his teammates, and what that element is like. So I think it's way more than a sports book, but I knew I could write the sports, right? So what I've heard from people who know me through hockey, and I can't say I'm surprised that I get this reaction, but I'm very happy to get this reaction. It's like, this was way more than I thought it was going to be. I love the love story, or like Noah's struggles with, you know, his mental health. Like, I feel that way,
Right.
or I connected with the story in this way. And also I should point out, it's a feel-good story. Like, this is not a depressing story. I mean, look, there are challenges that, in order to have a feel-good ending, you have to have some not
Something to
feel-good
overcome.
moments,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Exactly. And so I think a lot of people commented to me about, you know, they really enjoyed feeling good. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's got an uplifting message.
Absolutely. Do you see yourself continuing to write novels?
So creativity is kind of like figuring out when the rain is going to come if you're not a meteorologist. And so this was an idea that I obviously needed to sit on for quite a while before it came together. I will say, like, I've kind of kicked around the idea of a different sort of, like, it would not be a sequel to this, but hitting a lot of the same elements, but it's not ready yet. So what I learned from here is, like, I can let it percolate. Maybe it'll come to me, you know, down the road. I have a real job, or a paying job, so it's not like I need to crank out another book and no one's putting pressure on me to do that.
Writing for your life.
Yes, writing for my life.
Yeah. What theme do you think that you would want to explore?
Well, again, I think so the message, one of the messages in this book is challenges in life. You are not going to necessarily remove all of those challenges from your life, but you can still live a full, complete, fulfilling life in the face of adversity. So that interests me. So I kind of been thinking about, well, what other topics are like interesting to me, and it's kind of like, are you able to live as yourself rather than what society expects of you? And that's kind of, you know, I'm not really talking about gender per se, but just like, if we are in a certain situation, we are expected to act a certain way and be a certain way, even if we don't necessarily feel that that's our true self. And I can think that And there will be some sports in it too, and you know, some challenges, and kind of like the protagonist's journey is really kind of, I think, what hits home for me. And Noah has a journey in this novel, but this one turned out like, I'm very, very happy with how this novel turned out. I wouldn't be sitting here in front of all of you if I didn't believe in the story and how it turned out.
Okay, last question before I turn it over to you guys for questions. Tell us about the title, Blind Squirrel.
Yeah, so have any of you actually read the book, or you all just picked it up today? Okay, so there's an expression which goes like this: sometimes even a blind squirrel finds a nut. When I say this, some people are like nodding, and some people are, what do you mean? What do you mean? So this line is used in the book. Noah uses this line, and he uses it a throwaway line to his teammates relating to post-game hookups, which are really meaningless for him. He's not very comfortable doing this, but it happens every once in a while, and so he downplays it by making this statement, and his teammates laugh, and it kind of gives him cover, because he's not really interested. He wants a connection, he wants a real connection. So later, he uses this line relating to Lydia, and she asks him about it, and it's kind of it's one of kind of the significant scenes in the novel, but what he comes to realize is that it's not a throwaway line, that like he really has been living as a blind squirrel because he's not allowing himself to face the trauma of his childhood. And he's kind of like just running away from, so I probably need to back up a little bit here, because all of you have not read the novel. So in chapter one is called The Blinking Clock. We meet Noah, he's 32 years old. In chapter 1, he wakes up, he looks at his digital clock, the clock is blinking. So what the deal is with this clock is really sensitive to any shift in the electricity's current. So Noah will like press the hour button and the minute button, reset the time, it'll stop blinking, and then like soon enough it just starts blinking again. But it still manages to keep the correct time. So the line in the book is, eventually Noah stopped bothering to fix it. After all, it functioned. That was good enough for him. He gets up, goes to the bathroom, he looks in the mirror, he has a setback. And in chapter 1, we kind of see how Noah's struggles, his mental health struggles, are manifested. And he has come up with a term for this phenomenon, which, if you want kind of the inside baseball on this, so when I kind of wrote chapter 1 the first time, I didn't have this, and I was struggling to kind of describe what he was going through. So Noah himself, who is a wordsmith, comes up with this word. He calls it a mind storm. So when he's a child, he comes up with this word to describe what he's feeling. He's like drawn to beating himself up. Like he just can't, he's compelled to basically go to the mirror and beat himself up. So I came up with the word. I gave it to him to use. And from a literary execution standpoint, that solved a lot of problems for me, because now this term, this one word mindstorm, became the boogeyman. And so what he discovers, and this is related in chapter 1, is there are times when he's feeling okay. So he's like, I feel all right. And so when he has a mind storm, he's like, hey, remember that time I felt okay? And he feels even worse. So he discovers he can't really fight the mind storm, but he can run away from it. And so he sets up his life in such a way that he is constantly running from these mind storms. And what he does is he sets a very strict routine, and he keeps his mind active. So he is busy. And sometimes he's physically busy, sometimes he's mentally engaged. He loves to read. So he finds an escape through books. So this idea that he is running, when he has this moment, he's like, I really am a blind squirrel. He's like, I have no idea where I'm going. I'm just stumbling around, trying to get away from this mind storm. And Lydia's like, well, what's a mind storm? He's like, I don't even know if I can explain it to you. I'm not sure I can even explain it to myself. But I'm tired of doing this. And that's the moment kind of.
And the moment of connection, really.
The come to Jesus moment, right?
Yeah.
And he's able to kind of reveal to her kind of the elements of what's going on with him, because look, he's a dude, he's an athlete. This is set in the early 2000s, partly because I started writing it in kind of the late 2000s, so I backed it up, and when I came back to it, I'm like, the timing fits. But also the timing fit because in the early 2000s, if you're a dude who's an athlete and you're having these feelings, you were saying boo to anyone. You were not saying one word to anyone, and that fit with the character. It's a little bit more topical now. In fact, a lot of pro athletes are saying, hey, I'm dealing with OCD, or I'm dealing with anxiety, or, I've had depression. It's probably not as prevalent among my gender as the female gender, but athletes are starting to do it more. It was not happening when this novel is taking place like present day. So it would be totally on brand that he wouldn't say anything to anyone until he finally found someone that he can trust.
I mean, even still today, I think that resonates.
There's a long way to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Totally. Okay, what questions do you have? You can just raise your hand. Go ahead.
Hi. You talked a little bit about the connection you had, of course, with hockey and with love, but you didn't really explain yet, how did you connect with the mental illness piece? Did you research about that, or do you have other personal experience?
Yeah, so not just with that, and I was speaking with the owner earlier about like, how do you write a novel? Like, how do you give authenticity to the characters? So I did draw on some of my own experiences. This is not a memoir, but that includes some struggles with mental health. So like, Noah is kind of dealing with PTSD, honestly. Like, I didn't lose my parents when I was 12. I didn't go through what he went through. And the way his issues manifest themselves are not the way my issues manifest themselves, which is maybe one reason why I had trouble writing it the first time, because I'm all over the map. So like, I've dealt with anxiety. I think that it is not severe anxiety, as over the years I've learned that some people wake up every day and are like struggling with like gripping fear. That has not been my experience. But I have experienced your mind racing and feeling that it is leading in a way or on a path where you don't want to go. It's not particularly healthy. I also have this weird quirk where like something might be bothering me or something I'm worrying about, and that is tangible, but I actually don't focus my energy on that. I like end up focusing on something completely unrelated. I'm like, why am I even focusing on this over here? And like, it was hard to bring that to the page, honestly. Like, if I tried to write about me, it would probably have not been as clean as figuring out like how to do it for him. So I gave him something really, really simple and straightforward, and it was basically the same thing. Like, it's fiction. I can do what I want, right? As long as it seems authentic, and I think it came off that way. But this feeling that you are not completely in control, like that is something that I've experienced and kind of dealt with. And the other part of it too is what Noah learns is that like his issues, it's not like he has some bacterial infection where he can take an antibiotic and poof, like it's gone. Like, part of his journey is understanding that like these mind storms are a part of him. They're not going away. So how can you live your best life understanding that there are going to be times when you're not feeling great? And that's a theme in the book as well.
What other questions?
Okay, I have only a half-baked question, but I grew up before Title IX, so I wasn't in team sports, but I'm fascinated by the richness that it brings to people's lives. And my husband is a huge water polo player, and so I get to see all the different people that are a part of that team. And the team is a different entity than the individual people, and it's even more fascinating watching a game. We're talking about hockey and how fast it is and how it's just everything, right? It's emotional, it's physical, so the interplay between the different people and how they're it's greater than the sum of the parts, but the parts are a huge part of it. So I wonder if you have anything to share about that richness that I see a little bit of as an outsider, but I think as an insider, you maybe have a whole different perspective.
Yeah, I almost had too much knowledge. So like, if I can back up, like, what went wrong the first time? when I tried to write it. So I kind of told you kind of what went wrong with chapter 1. I was like, I just intuitively knew like this is not good. I'm like, I don't really know how to express his mental health struggles, which is kind of chapter 1. Although I did have the idea for the blinking clock the first time, but the rest of it was garbage, basically. So chapter 2 is called A Family of Bears. It's about a hockey team. Chapter 5, which is one of the flashback chapters, is called Team Nicholson, about his childhood with his parents. So family is team, team is family, right? So I didn't have that title yet, Family of Bears. But chapter 2 is like, okay, he's out of his apartment, he's now going to practice, you're meeting his team and his teammates and his role on the team as captain and what that's like. And again, the first time I wrote it, intuitively, I was like, this is just not coming out the way that I wanted it to, and I didn't really know why. And after the 15 years away, when I went back to it, I realized that I just had way too much hockey information in there. So like, as a reader, you don't need to know who like the third line right winger is on this team. But I was like, oh, I need to like paint a whole picture. Like, here's this player and that player and this player and the other player. And basically I just like whittled all that down. So there's Noah, there's the coach, and they're like the 2 other main characters that are players that you really get to know. And then there are a couple of other players that are mentioned because they are like on the ice or they're around, but they don't even speak. And so that is way more digestible. So when I said I wanted to write an accessible story, I never really actually finished that thought, but like I wanted to write something for somebody who doesn't know the first thing about hockey, doesn't even like hockey, can pick up this book and be like, I really like this story. Like somebody might write a novel about, I don't know, a mortician. Like, all right, I'm not overly interested in morticians, right? Like I don't need to know about like what they embalming doesn't interest me or anything like that. But if somebody tells an intriguing, compelling story in which the protagonist is a mortician and part of that protagonist's journey involves like what that person does through their job, I will be interested, I will be engaged. So that was the tightrope I kind of had to walk. I had to bring my expertise and knowledge of hockey, but do it in a way that was accessible. And so, honestly, when I talk about the story wrote itself, the hockey was some of the hardest to write because in my job, I'm kind of in the business of teaching people about the game. And so I'd write a hockey scene, I'm like, I'm deleting 60% of this because it's just not necessary.
It wouldn't fit with the tone of the book either. Like if you're reading along and then suddenly there's a hockey scene and you get zoomed way in and you know, there's...
Yes and no, Bryn, though, because so I needed to get the reader to the point. So like the middle of the book, there's basically a hockey chapter and you're in it. You're on the ice, you're on the bench, you're in the locker room, and there are certain things that are happening in this game that actually have themes outside of sports too. So I needed this in there, and that's where I could kind of flex my broadcasting chops, basically. But somebody, like if you started with that chapter, you'd be like, I have no idea what he's talking about here. So I needed to explain what was going to be happening later in a way, not in a way that it was hockey 101. So how do you do that?
It's like
right?
building up to it.
Right, so like offside, which if you know anything about hockey, like offside is a rule in hockey. Offside is not important in this one chapter. So I don't need offside. I don't need to explain offside. There are referees and there are linesmen. The reason the linesman is called the linesman is because they are watching the lines for offside. So I'm like, I'm not even going to call the linesman a linesman, because if I call the linesman a linesman, I have to be like, why are they called the linesman? So he just became the official, right? I didn't need to touch that. Face-offs, on the other hand, like Noah's gift, the reason he's able to play pro hockey is has this extraordinary hand-eye coordination. He is brilliant on face-offs. All right, so that is something that needs to be explained. Like, how does he take face-offs? Like, why is he so good at it? Why is there an advantage to taking it on one side of the ice as opposed to the other side of the ice? And what I found was one of the chapters in part 1, like Noah's parents die. Okay, he's living in Southern California. He's a baseball prodigy because he's got this incredible hand-eye coordination. never skated before. He moves across the country to move with his grandmother in Massachusetts. He quits baseball. She's like, you have to pick a sport. He's like, all right, well, hockey uses a stick, I guess, and I'll try this. He's a horrible skater, so he has to learn how to get his skating up to snuff. But what he finds is like he has this immense skill on face-offs, right? So in the chapter, his grandmother is Nan. The chapter is Nan's 5 rules. So he goes in movies like she says, I have 5 rules. You follow these 5 rules, we're gonna get along just fine. So one of the 5 rules is you're gonna play sport. So in this Nan's 5 rules chapter, Noah is learning to play the sport. Because Noah is learning to play the sport, the reader is learning too. So it's not like, in hockey, there are 3 zones, and there are 3, you know.
Right. It's a very clever
Right?
way.
It's kind of like Noah is like, well, why is the face-off here? And the
Right.
coach is like, oh, well, that's because of this,
Yeah.
right? It's dialogue.
Yeah.
So the reader is learning along the way, and that was one of the kind of tricky things to navigate. You asked about kind of like the community of the team. That part I knew I could do. I just had to whittle it way down so it was digestible, and I think I did that. So.
What other questions?
I have a question. The mental attitude of an athlete, especially a hockey player, do you notice that there's a difference from a professional athlete versus, let's say, a minor athlete that's trying to make it to the professional league, what their mindset is?
Well, that's actually a very poignant question, because one of the 2 players, besides Noah, is a 20-year-old prodigy who is a top pick. So the way it works in the AHL, and this is something I had to like, there's some exposition there just explaining like what are the minor leagues and all of that. So Noah is never going to play in the NHL. His skating is not good enough, but he is a great captain and he's a very productive player at the minor league level. And he's 32. He's experienced. So the NHL team, the affiliate, is happy to have him there, even though they know they're never going to summon him. But the main purpose of the minor league team is to have the young prospects who are not ready yet to play at the major league level get valuable experience at the minor league level. And that is true even today. The Lightning have an affiliate in Syracuse, New York, and the players who are prospects who aren't quite ready to play with the Lightning go to Syracuse, and there they're going to play a lot and they're going to learn the game. So in chapter 2 of Family of Bears, this hotshot 20-year-old prodigy, hockey prodigy, is arriving and Noah takes him under his wing. And their relationship, which is a pretty cool relationship, like it's the older player and, you know, he's Russian too, so Ilya Kuznetsov is his name. So Kuznetsov and Noah form this really close bond because Noah is his mentor, which is actually, he's mentioned in the back of the book, this, you know, Russian player. And part of Kuznetsov's journey is understanding what it means to be a pro. That he's got all of this talent, but you can't just kind of go off on your own and, you know, do what you want to do if it's not in the best interest of the team, and it's not like you're playing against other professional players now. You know, you're not an amateur anymore. The quality is that much better, and I was able to kind of bring that into the story as well, which is a little bit in the weeds of the hockey, but it's done in a way where somebody, again, who doesn't know the first thing about hockey can understand, all right, this young player is told, don't do this. All right, you can do this. And like, how closely does he follow it, and what are the lessons that are learned there? And as it turned out, and I kind of knew this even in the early version when I kind of thought about how this story was going to unfold, Noah himself has a hard lesson that he has to learn when he's a kid playing baseball. So his father is a former minor league catcher. And so that's kind of how he's introduced to baseball. And his mother and his father are very closely involved in kind of Noah's upbringing in baseball as part of that. So Noah is like a little league superstar, right? And there's a big game and he kind of makes a selfish decision and he has to learn that lesson. And later that is kind of mirrored with Kuznetsov. And Noah is now kind of in the role of, well, let me tell you something, like this is how you have to handle it when you kind of make a selfish decision. I don't think that's giving away too much, but that's in the book as well.
I have another question based on your question. I'm wondering, were there any particular players on your mind when you were writing these characters, in developing the characters?
No, but I think that the players that you learn about kind of fit into a general category. I've seen players like that before. Like I've seen the young, prospect who kind of needs to learn how to play the game the right way.
It's more like a stereotype of a player.
A little bit, but I don't think any of those players are stereotypes. And the other thing about Kuznetsov, so Noah is a wordsmith. I'm actually, if we can, I'll read a short passage which will just illustrate exactly, like, again, consistency with the character, right? But Noah is impressed from the get-go that Kuznetsov speaks almost perfect English. And like, you think about it, he's Russian. He played in Canada for 2 years in junior hockey. So he decided to come over at 18 after he was drafted, Kuznetsov. And so Noah meets him. He's like, your English is really, really good. And he's like, how did you learn it? Kuznetsov answers like, well, this is how I learned it, watching TV, basically. I've heard that actually from, European players. Like, how did you learn English? Well, I watch television, But you think about it, like, imagine you going to like Moscow to do your profession and everybody around you is speaking this language you don't know, but you're still committed to, this is where you need to be, right? So you have to learn. It's quite a challenge. And I've seen that before. And some Russians take a little bit longer. But I've seen and heard, certainly, and been around European players, they come over and you're just like, my gosh, like how do you speak? You hardly even have an accent. And that's where that's from.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, any other questions?
Did you have a question over here? She actually nailed. Oh, she did.
Oh,
All right.
read your mind.
Well, I'm gonna need a copy of it.
Yeah.
So,
Someone pass over a copy.
you guys could read along if you want. It's not.
Okay.
So at the end of part 1, Noah sustains his injury. So at the beginning of part 2, it's probably the lowest point he is in the book. Because as I've said, like he's kind of relied on his hockey career to keep the mind storms away. They give him a routine, they keep his mind active, and now all of a sudden he's like, I should have known this day was coming, and I just kept putting it off, and now here I am. And that's actually part of the recovery, right? He needed his security blanket taken away, and now he's like back at the bottom, and he has to rebuild it up, and so he ends up rebuilding it in part 2. But at the beginning of part 2, he's in his apartment. His injury is not significant in that it's going to affect the rest of his life. He just can't play hockey anymore. But he's not doing anything overly productive. And he's struggling now with the mind storms are like raging on him. So I am going. It's kind of hard to hold the microphone and turn the page at the same time. So I'm going to bottom of page 205. So Noah is able to accomplish only 2 productive things a day as he is like wallowing in his self-pity. He manages to walk to the supermarket to get his dinner and then walk back to his apartment. And I lived in Hershey, so I know that that's doable. And then he manages to cook his dinner. And he intentionally only buys 1 meal at a time, so he knows he's forcing himself to go out each day. So I'm starting at the second to last paragraph. The supermarket was a 10-minute walk from Noah's apartment, not far from Gillies, which is the sports bar hangout. It was one of a chain of supermarkets clustered in Pennsylvania and neighboring states known as Giant. When Noah first moved to Hershey, he wondered about the name. Why Giant? True, it was a supermarket, not a corner store or a deli, but Giant seemed no bigger than any other supermarket. In Noah's opinion, if the powers that be really wanted their supermarket chain to be named Giant, then they should have built a giant supermarket. It might have been difficult to increase the width, but why not the height? Add a second story with special cart-accessible escalators. Better yet, make it 3 stories high. Or giant could be used as a noun instead of an adjective. Include in the logo a picture of a giant. Not a scary giant, of course, but a friendly giant. One that wasn't green or wearing a leafy tunic, so the giant wouldn't be confused with the jolly green giant. The giant could serve as a store mascot and roam the supermarket aisles, helping people find what they need. Noah wasn't thinking about the giant anymore. He just wanted to buy his food and return home. So that's a pretty short little scene, but when you were asking me, like, thinking about the characters, so I lived in Pennsylvania, so I know Giant is the name
In
of the
Hershey
super.
too, right?
In Hershey, yeah. So I'm thinking, like, all right, what's Noah doing? All right, he's walking to the supermarket. He's going to Giant. And it's like, of course, this is totally what Noah would think. Like, he would think about, like, why did they name the supermarket Giant? So I did a couple of things there, because you haven't heard about Giant until that scene. And it's a small scene, but it's a fun scene. It is totally consistent with the character, because he is constantly thinking about words. He's a voracious reader. And it also illustrates that he is, at this particular point, not thinking about that.
Right.
So this serves as a contrast, like, he is at his low point, and, like, even Noah is not, like, of course he would think about the giant, but, like, at this point, he's like, I just want my food, and I'm gonna head back, because he's at this low point. So that's a short scene. I wasn't gonna redo a longer one, but again, consistency with the characters.
Right.
And I think that helped me really add some authenticity, not just to Noah, but to a lot of the other main characters, including his parents, his grandmother, Lydia, Kuznetsov. Like, you really get to know all of them quite well.
Any other questions?
Sorry, I got one more.
Okay, go
Sorry.
for it.
Yeah.
And I didn't read the book, so I don't know. But, 32 years old, as you know, being a hockey player, that's over his prime, so to speak. Getting to the NHL. Did he have more mental health issues later on in life because maybe knowing that he wasn't going to ultimately make the pros?
So
Knowing his
pros,
maybe on the
yeah. So
back end?
I'm gonna actually correct you on a couple of the verbiage points here. So if you're a professional, you're getting paid.
Correct.
Minor league players are professional. They're just not major league. They make less money, but he is earning a salary. So he joins the Bears at age 22 out of college. He's been there 10 years. This is his 11th season. So he kind of knows that, like, he's got less runway in front of him than behind him, but he is so focused, like where he is at the beginning of the book, he is so focused on, like, must keep away from mindstorms. What do I need to do? So kind of, he has an idea that at some point the end is going to come and he's going to have to deal with this, losing his security blanket, basically. But 32 is not, like, incapable of playing. And what I kind of get across in this first hockey chapter, Family Bears, is like Noah still has his hand-eye coordination, and he's still a productive player, and, like, the end is not quite there yet, and the injury is unforeseen. So the injury is what ends his career, not he just can't keep up anymore. He can still keep up.
Is it also that his mental health is not letting him necessarily look to the future too, or is that not a part of it?
Yeah, I think that is a part of it, because he is just focused on, like, I don't want to feel badly about myself, and if I do feel badly about myself, I need to, like, run away from it as quickly as I can.
Right.
And that is his single-minded focus in terms of, like, the big picture. But, and again, this is a line that, so there is an earlier hockey scene. So you have a family of Bears, you kind of meet the team. Then there's the first flashback chapter where you kind of learn about Noah's parents. And then we're back to kind of present day, and it's game day. And so there's a game. And then there's the after the game where you learn about flying squirrel. You kind of learn about his history with women, which is not particularly
Storied.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have much experience, and he's not really satisfied with. He wants something like his parents had. He wants a real connection. Yeah, and he hasn't been able to find that, in part because he is terrified to, like, break out of his routine and kind of broaden his horizons. So you have the game in this chapter, which is called the jungle. Half of the jungle is the game, and you kind of learn that the game of hockey is a little bit like a jungle and what happens on the ice. And then the team goes to the bar after the game, which is a different kind of jungle. Noah is very capable of navigating the jungle on the ice, and is completely, like, a doofus when it comes to navigating the jungle off the ice, and he kind of removes himself from the situation. He's almost like looking out for the team while he's there. So the end of the chapter, he goes home, goes into his apartment, he's exhausted. He's just like, I am so tired of running. He gets into bed, but he can't fall asleep. And he's like looking at the ceiling in the dark, and he's like, I'm existing, but I'm not living. And he actually says that to himself. And then the final line of the chapter is, but Noah knew that it hadn't always been this way for him before the accident. It hadn't been this way at all. And boom, you get to Team Nicholson. So then you kind of get pre-accident Noah, where he was most assuredly living, a full life and wasn't just existing. I forget what you asked me about that, but I mean, like, he is
not
aware.
looking to the future.
He is aware that he is struggling.
Right.
He just doesn't really have. All he knows how to do is to like keep away from this thing.
Right.
That's his single-minded focus.
Yes. Sure.
So I know the novel is fictional, but like what percent or how much nonfiction is in there? How much do you, I know you have a lot of experience.
Yeah.
in
There's a little bit.
Details of
Yeah.
Do you mean
so-
how much? Do you mean how much of Dave is in the book, or do you mean how much
Not
of?
necessarily him, his background
Okay,
or whatever. but it
hockey
could be
information.
any-
Yeah, so like Noah grows up in Southern California in the 70s, right? So I mean, his experience growing up in Southern California in the 70s, like he and his parents, they watch baseball, right? Like that's part of the connection, particularly with his dad. Like, so the three of them spend time basically helping him hit, right? That's something they do as a family. They call themselves Team Nicholson. I just didn't make up that name for the chapter. But then he also has a singular connection with his dad and his mom. So with his dad, they watch baseball together because his dad was a minor league catcher. The catcher actually calls the pitches. The catcher kind of orchestrates how the pitch sequence is going to go to try and get a batter out. It's like the thinking man's position. So Paul, Noah's dad, kind of teaches Noah how to do this. And so as Noah gets older, like the chapter begins, Noah's 5, the chapter ends, he's 12, the accident. So, I mean, I had to carry 7 years in this chapter. When I started the chapter, I'm like, how am I going to fill 7 years? Kind of knew what I wanted to get done in the chapter. So part of it was like segment by segment. So like as he and his dad spend time together, like he gets better and better and better at calling pitches. His mom and Noah have reading time together. So like it starts when he's a small child. She reads to him. She's an English teacher. She is super smart. And so that's kind of where his love of reading comes from. And so through the years, it's kind of like, okay, now they're in their science fiction phase, and now they're in like mystery phase, and now they're in like the classics phase. And as he gets older, I was trying to think of like age-appropriate books that she would share with him. So as some of this stuff is going on, like they're watching baseball, I'm like, okay, this actually happened, right? Like the 1975 World Series is featured in this book. That happened. So like they're watching that. The chapter that I read the sequence from, where Noah is, post-accident. So his accident happens in April of 2001. So the chapter is titled 911. So Noah is in need of being rescued. He is flailing. Also in this chapter, a cat shows up on his porch. The cat is a stray. And this is one of the first things that kind of helps pull him out of his rut. He rescues the cat. We could also say the cat kind of rescues him, right? Chapter ends right at 9/11. So that obviously happened, right? So I mean, there are elements. That was another reason why I didn't want to change the timeline too. I'm like, okay, this is actually works in terms of I didn't bump it ahead, 10 years or whatever. And when that happens, it's kind of a call to action for him. And he's like, I can't just be sitting around here, my apartment, wasting time every day. I need to get going. And so he kind of takes his first step, maybe his second or third step out of this low point that he was in.
So it's very rooted in our real world.
Yeah, I mean, things happen, right? So, I mean, the characters are fictional, but, Hershey has a team.
Right.
I actually had to get permission from the Bears to use their name, which they were nice enough to give me permission. But, so my last year in Hershey was 2001, 2002. They moved into a new building in 2002, 2003. That new building is actually called Giant Center.
Oh, wow.
So Noah's last year is 2000, 2001. So as he's going through kind of the beginning of part 2 is the following season, which is referenced as the final season at Hershey Park Arena, the old building, which was actually true, and that they're starting this new building the next year, Giant Center. And so he goes to a game and he was like, I probably shouldn't ask the general manager if this building is any bigger than, you know, because it's Giant Center.
Yeah.
So I got that line in there, but that actually happened.
Yeah.
And so I knew that and,
Yeah.
and was able to put that in, and it added a wrinkle to it.
So I just want to be aware of time. since
Yeah,
I think
where
we're
are we?
already at almost 7, so I want to make sure everybody has time to get their books signed.
Yeah.
So we will end and give Dave some time to sign books. We still have a few more copies downstairs if anyone hasn't grabbed one yet. And thank you so much for coming, and let's give Dave a round of applause and congratulations on all these